The routing slip came through at 6:14 on a Tuesday, which is the kind of detail I remember because Tuesdays in the vein corridor are when the compact aid relay pushes its backlog queue, and everything that's been sitting in low-priority review for 6 to 12 weeks suddenly shakes loose at once. I was in the galley with a cup of something that passed for coffee, reading the overnight freight manifest, when my first mate Dov Heron leaned into the hatchway and told me we had a new assignment. "Single unit tow," he said, "derelict station, cold gas corridor 6 days out." I asked him the rate. "Standard aid freight," he said. I asked him if the station had power. He looked at the slip. Partial, it said, emergency systems only. I told him to plot the course and finish his breakfast. We were already in the corridor, already 6 days from anything worth calling a port, and the deliberate margin had not had a freight call in 11 days. Standard aid freight was not good money, but it was money, and the vein corridor in winter, if you could call it winter in a cold gas nebula, was not the place to be particular. I finished my coffee and went to the bridge. My ship is not a rescue vessel. The HCMV Deliberate Margin is a Class 4 bulk hauler, registered out of Callisto Station, with a cargo deck rated for 70,000 metric tons of pressurized freight, a crew of 4 including myself, and a tow rig that my previous owner installed for exactly the kind of dead station work that the Compact Aid Logistics Network farms out to civilian contractors when their own tenders are deployed elsewhere. The rig is adequate. The ship is adequate. The crew, Dov, our engineer Petya Soren, and our systems tech Uniki are better than adequate. We are not heroes. We are freight people. I want to say that clearly because of what came later, and because I have read the report the Compact Aid Secretariat filed afterward, and I want to be clear that the report overstates our role considerably. We were freight people who took a routing slip on a Tuesday. The station designation on the slip was Kothvel. I didn't recognize the name. Petya looked it up in the corridor registry and found a 2-line entry. Vaath-senn Orbital Relay Station, Class 7 Fixed Installation, Vein Corridor Sector 4, commissioned 11 years ago, flagged derelict 2 years and 9 months ago following compact aid budget realignment in the corridor. Previous tow and salvage request filed with Compact Aid Logistics 17 months ago, pending allocation. Current request filed 6 weeks ago, reflagged low priority. Status: emergency systems operational, no distress beacon active. No distress beacon active, I said. No distress beacon, Petya confirmed. I thought about that. No distress beacon meant the station wasn't actively calling for help. It meant someone there, or the station's automatic systems, had decided the situation didn't meet the threshold. Either the station was empty and running on its own maintenance loop, or whoever was there had decided, for whatever reason, not to push the emergency flag. Stations in the vein corridor go derelict for a lot of reasons. Budget reallocation in this case, which meant the compact had stopped funding its operations, and the vaath-senn, whoever they were, had either pulled their people out or lost them to something the 2-line registry entry wasn't going to tell me. I pulled up the vaath-senn in the corridor species index. Small entry, bilateral, smooth-skinned ash-pale officer cast, translucent secondary eyelids, subdermal communication nodes along the jaw and collar line that bioluminesce in low-light conditions. Organized in garrison hierarchies, not a species I had worked with before. Their home system was listed as vaath-senn Prime, 12 transit days from the corridor. Their compact aid liaison office was listed as inactive. I noted the course, confirmed the tow rig calibration with Petya, and went back to my freight manifest. 6 days in the vein corridor is 6 days in the vein corridor. The corridor earns its name from the cold gas nebula that fills it, iron oxide particulate and low-temperature hydrogen clouds that scatter the secondary star's amber light and give everything in the corridor the quality of a photograph taken through gauze. It is not a busy stretch of space. The relay stations that punctuate the sector were built during an earlier period of compact expansion and have not all been maintained at pace with that expansion's retreat. We passed two other flagged derelict designations on the way to Vaath-senn, both of which the registry showed as genuinely unoccupied. I noted them. I noted the routing numbers. I thought about the shape of a corridor in which the infrastructure had been allowed to fall behind like this, and what it implied about who was making decisions and how far they were from the corridor when they made them. I try not to be political about logistics. It doesn't help anything, but I note things. On the third day out, I had Pedia pull the full compact aid allocation report for Vein Corridor Sector 4, which is not a document a freight contractor normally requests, but which is available on the compact public register if you know where to look. The report was 18 months old, the most recent one filed. It covered 11 stations in the sector, of which 7 were flagged as reduced service or derelict. The budget commentary noted, in the passive voice that budget commentaries favor, that corridor maintenance expenditure had been reallocated to higher utilization sectors pending demand review. Demand review, in a corridor with 7 derelict stations. Pedia read the report over my shoulder and said nothing. After a moment he went back to the engine room. He is not a political person either, but he is an engineer, and engineers notice when systems are being allowed to fail at a rate that exceeds the formal acknowledgement of their failure. On the 5th day I pulled the Vaath-senn file again, the 2-line entry, and cross-referenced it against the allocation report. Vaath-senn's derelict flagging had been entered in the allocation report under the category routine phase-out, which is the category the compact uses when it stops funding a station as a planned measure rather than an emergency. There was no indication in the file that anyone had checked whether the station was occupied before entering the phase-out designation. Phase-out planned, for a station with 214 people in it. I noted this too. I noted it in my personal log, not the freight manifest, because the freight manifest has no field for this kind of thing. We reached Vaath-senn on the 6th day at 9:30 local ship time, in the kind of light that the cold gas nebula makes when the secondary star is behind it, amber and diffuse, soft on the hull, so that everything in the corridor looks slightly suspended, slightly not quite real. I was on the bridge. Dov was at the scan station. He said, "Captain, I'm reading heat signatures." I said, "How many?" He said, "A lot. Inside the station. The outer ring is cold, no thermal, but the inner hub is warm, well within inhabited range." I said, "How many signatures?" He worked the scan for a moment. Then he said, "I count 214. I sat with that number for a moment. The routing slip said, "Single unit tow, derelict station, no distress beacon." 214 people. I keyed the comms. This is HCMV deliberate margin, compact aid freight contractor, routing number Vein 7749, inbound to Vaath-senn on tow assignment. Please confirm station status. There was a silence, not the silence of an empty station, the silence of someone deciding something. Then the comm crackled and a voice came through. It was a careful voice, a voice that had learned to be careful, that had the kind of flat precision in it that you hear in people who have been conserving things for a long time. Energy, air, words. HCMV deliberate margin, the voice said. "This is Vaath-senn, Fleet Adjutant Sailvath commanding. We confirm station status. We are operational in reduced capacity." I said, "Fleet Adjutant, I'm reading 214 life signs aboard. The routing slip has you flagged as derelict. Can you clarify your situation?" Another silence, longer this time. "Then we are functional, Captain. We have power on inner hub sections only. We have food stores at approximately 14 days remaining for current complement. We have recycled atmosphere on 4 of 11 sections. We have medical facilities operating at minimal capacity. We submitted a tow and resupply request 17 months ago. We did not receive a response. 6 weeks ago we submitted a secondary request. We are grateful you have come. I looked at Dov. He was looking at his scan readouts. He was not looking at me because I think he knew what was on my face and did not want to be the one looking at it. 14 days of food, 4 sections of livable atmosphere. 214 people who had been in there for, I did the math. The station had been flagged derelict 2 years and 9 months ago. 17 months ago they had filed the first request. They had been managing somehow from before that. 3 years. They had been in that station for 3 years with no resupply, no power beyond emergency systems, no ship, no response, and they had not pushed the distress beacon. I asked why. Fleet Adjutant Vaath said, after a moment, the Compact Aid Distress Protocol requires certification of imminent threat to life to activate emergency beacon status. We were not, at the time of each assessment, at immediate risk of loss of life. We were at sustained risk of degraded survival capacity. We assessed that activating the beacon without imminent certification would place our request in a contested queue and potentially delay resolution. We chose to conserve the beacon for true emergency. I thought about what it meant to conserve the beacon for true emergency when you had been in a cold gas nebula in a derelict station for 3 years. I thought about it, and I did not say what I thought, because saying what I thought would not have helped anything and we had work to do. I said, Fleet Adjutant, I am going to dock and come aboard. I need to see your situation in person before I can assess the tow parameters. She said, understood, Captain. We will prepare a docking collar on Section 2. I should tell you our docking lights are non-operational. You will be docking in low-light conditions. I said understood. Pedia walked me through the docking. He is a careful engineer and he talked to me in the kind of steady, unexcited voice that engineers use when something is technically demanding but technically achievable, which is the voice I most want to hear in difficult moments. The deliberate margin has docked in worse conditions. We locked the collar, equalized pressure, and I went through with Una, who carries a medical kit as part of her systems tech qualifications, and Dov, who carries nothing useful in an emergency but is large enough that his presence tends to calm situations. The first thing I noticed was the cold. The Section 2 corridor was dark, emergency strips only, amber-orange and low, and the temperature was, Una told me afterward, about 6 degrees Celsius. Not dangerous. Not comfortable. The kind of temperature that tells you the heating system has been triaged down to keep other things running, that whoever made the triage decision did it carefully and has been living with the result. The second thing I noticed was the people. They were in the corridor. Not a crowd, not a rush toward us, not any kind of disorder. They were standing in the corridor in their emergency suits, most of them, or in layered station wear with thermal underlayers visible at the collar, and they were quiet. 214 people can be quiet in a way that carries weight, and these people were quiet in that way. I could see their faces, ash pale, the secondary eyelids half drawn, which I learned later is a thermal conservation reflex in the vaath-senn, the body pulling its resources inward. And in the amber emergency light, the subdermal nodes along their jawlines were a very faint blue, the bioluminescence reduced to almost nothing, which is also a thermal thing, I learned. They glow when they're warm enough to spare the energy. When they're cold and careful and conserving everything, the nodes go dark. There was almost no glow in that corridor. Fleet Adjutant Vaath came forward to meet us. She was tall for the species, and her emergency suit had rank markings on the collar that had been maintained with considerable care, polished, where the material allowed polishing, the insignia aligned precisely, which told me something about her before she said anything. She had the flat, precise face of someone who has been keeping things together by force of will for a long time, and the secondary eyelids drew back when she saw me, fully open, which I learned was their version of close attention, or relief, or something that covered both. "Captain," she said. "Fleet Adjutant," I said, "tell me what you need." She looked at me for a moment. I don't think she expected that, the directness of it, the asking without preamble. I think she expected assessment questions, tow rig specifications, compliance checks, form numbers. I think she had spent 3 years dealing with compact aid logistics protocols that asked for form numbers before they asked for anything else. She said, "We need food, we need heat, we need medical assessment for 47 members of garrison who have been managing injuries or respiratory conditions with minimal supplies. We need transport for 214 personnel when the station is towed to a facility capable of receiving us. We asked for a tow cable and a food drop. We understand the routing was classified as a basic resupply tow. We want you to know we are grateful. Whatever you are able to provide." Whatever you are able to provide, that is what she said. 3 years in the dark on 14 days of food, and she said whatever you are able to provide because she had learned, I think, not to ask for more than a form classification would cover. I said, "I'll be honest with you, Fleet Adjutant. My ship is a Class 4 hauler. I have 4 crew, a tow rig, and enough freight capacity to take about 60 of your people comfortably, more if we double up the cargo deck sections. I can provide food from our stores, we'll be short ourselves, but we can make it to the nearest relay. I have a systems tech who has medical kit qualifications." Her nodes flickered, a faster blue pulse there and gone. I said, "The tow isn't going to work the way the routing slip described. The slip said single unit salvage, but you're not a derelict. You're an inhabited station. I'm going to file an amended contact report the moment I'm back on my bridge, and I'm going to request upgraded response. I can't promise what they send or how fast, but I am going to make the request, and I am going to flag it as an occupied station emergency, which it is, and I'm going to stay on this dock until something better than me arrives." She looked at me for a long time. The secondary eyelids drew back further, which I hadn't thought was possible. She said, "The compact aid queue for this corridor." I said, "I know, I'm not filing with the corridor queue. I'm filing direct with the Earth Aid Coordination Desk at the Secretariat, which is the override channel for occupied station emergencies, and I'm putting my contractor registration on the line to certify the occupied station status. If I'm wrong about the override channel, I'll eat the fine. I don't think I'm wrong." She said very quietly, "How long have you known about us?" I said, "Since this morning." Her nodes went bright for a moment. Not the conserved flicker I'd seen before, bright, the blue-white that I later learned was the species' full heat signature, the thing their nodes do when they're warm and not conserving and not afraid. Just for a moment. Then she brought it back down, the discipline of 3 years reasserting itself, and she said, "We have been here for 3 years, 2 months and 14 days. I said, "I know, I'm sorry it took that long." She said, "The compact aid queue." I said, "I know." She said nothing else. She turned and led us into the station, and we went to work. I won't describe all of what we found, because this is a completion report and not a casualty registry, and because UNA's medical assessment documentation covers the clinical detail more accurately than I can. What I will say is that the 47 I had been told about were the flagged cases, the ones vaath had officially designated for priority attention. The full medical picture, once UNA started moving through sections 2, 3, and 4, which were the occupied sections, the warm ones, the ones where the garrison had consolidated to share heat and air and reduce the surface area the heating system had to maintain, was larger than 47. Respiratory conditions from recycled atmosphere running at reduced filtration capacity for 3 years. Joints and connective tissue that had adapted, not always well, to the sustained cold of living in 6-degree corridors. Nutritional profiles that were functional but had been functional on minimum viable intake for 17 months. since the first request went unanswered, and the garrison had understood that whatever resupply they had was what they had. 3 people who had not recovered from injuries sustained during the power reduction event that had taken the station's outer ring offline in the first winter. The event, I learned, that had begun the 3-year situation in the first place. The garrison had been managing all of this. Managing it carefully, inventively, with the kind of systematic ingenuity that you develop when you have no alternative and you have to choose, every day, between the things you can sustain and the things you have to let go. Vaath had a duty roster for everything: atmosphere recycling maintenance, food rationing cycles, medical monitoring rotations, equipment inspection schedules, that was updated daily and posted in Section 3's common area on a physical board, because her electronic management systems had been shut down to conserve power 18 months ago. Physical board, handwritten entries in the vaath-senn script that looks like overlapping curves, every shift, every person, every allocation, current to the morning of our arrival. I stood in front of that board for a while. There were 3 years of previous entries stored in a sealed Section 4 locker. Vaath showed me, organized by month, each month's sheets bound with a strip of corridor seal tape. 38 months of records. Every person accounted for every day. She had kept them because command records were command records, she told me, and because if a ship came, she wanted to be able to account for every member of her garrison without delay. She had kept 38 months of records in case a ship came. I took a photograph of that board and a photograph of the locker, which is not in my official report but is in my personal log. I went back to the deliberate margin and filed the amended contact report. I flagged it Occupied Station Emergency on the Earth Aid Coordination Override Channel. I described what I had found: 214 vaath-senn garrison personnel, 3 years and 2 months of occupation under degraded conditions, 14 days of food remaining, recycled atmosphere operational on 4 of 11 sections, 47 confirmed priority medical cases requiring professional assessment, and a broader medical population requiring evaluation. I requested minimum 2 additional tenders, 1 hospital capacity vessel, corridor security escort given the isolation of the sector and the extended duration of the situation, and priority allocation under Article 7 of the Compact Aid Occupied Station Protocol, which I had Una look up for me while I was drafting the report because I am a freight captain and not an aid lawyer, but I was reasonably confident that Article 7 covered exactly this. It took Una 4 minutes to confirm that Article 7 covered exactly this. I filed the report at 13:47 local ship time. Then I started unloading food stores. We carry 3 times our operational requirement in food, because the vein corridor in winter is not a place you want to discover you're short. It meant we had enough to improve the garrison's ration situation meaningfully for the duration of our dock. Dav ran the unloading. He is organized in the way that large, unhurried people sometimes are, systematically, without drama. And by 1600, we had 2 tons of freight standard rations on Kothvel's Section 3 loading dock, sorted by nutritional category with a handwritten inventory that I made him do twice, because I wanted it to be accurate when the follow-on vessels arrived and needed to know what was there. Una worked the medical cases. She is a systems tech, not a doctor, but she has the Level 3 Compact Aid medical kit certification that our insurance requires, and that she has always been somewhat embarrassed about having, as if it implied she expected to need it. She needed it. She worked from 1100 to 2200 that day, moving through sections 2, 3, and 4, doing assessments, prioritizing cases, administering from the kit what she could, documenting what she couldn't treat and what it would take to address it. She told me later that the vaath-senn medical officer, a garrison physician named Othvel Sarath, who had been managing the full medical population with a depleted store for 17 months, met her in Section 2 with a 12-page handwritten log of every case, every treatment, every observation, organized by severity and date. 12 pages, handwritten, every patient, not a summary, a record. The kind of record you keep when you know you may eventually need to hand it to someone who can actually do something with it, and you want that person to lose no time on catching up. Una told me she read the whole log before she opened the kit, because Dr. Othvel had done the work of knowing every single one of those people's conditions better than any emergency scan would have, and she was not going to walk past that. Una told me this at 2300 when she finally came back to the deliberate margin to sleep. She was not the kind of person who said things like the work a doctor does matters, but she said it then, and I believe she meant it. We slept in shifts. I don't think most of the garrison slept at all. When I came through Section 3 at 200 to check on the ration distribution, the amber corridor was populated with quiet figures, garrison members in their layered wear, some of them eating from the ration packs we had offloaded, some of them sitting in the way that people sit when they have been waiting so long that they have lost the habit of moving freely and are relearning it one careful gesture at a time. I spoke to a few of them, not at length. My vaath-senn was non-existent and the translation unit manages basics, but enough to understand that the garrison had been told a ship was here and more were coming. Most of them had not asked for detail beyond that. They were in the corridor because the corridor was where the ship had come, and I think proximity to the docking collar felt different than it had the day before. One of them, an older garrison member, a signals supervisor based on the collar markings that I was learning to read, asked me, through the translation unit, how far it was to the nearest populated system. I told him 12 days at standard transit. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "We have not been 12 days from anywhere in 3 years." The translation unit gave me this in a flat register that was probably not the register he used, but the weight of it came through anyway. I told him that within 4 days, he would be aboard a hospital barge headed for Compact Aid's regional hub. He looked at me with the secondary eyelids fully drawn back, and then looked at the amber corridor around him, at the physical board on the Section 3 wall, at the loading dock where our rations were stacked, at the docking collar that had a ship on the other side of it, and he did not say anything else. After a moment he went back to his ration pack, and I went back to my rounds. The first response came at 3:18 the following morning. I was on my bridge, running the power allocation check for our second day of dock, when the comm crackled, not Kothvel's frequency, a different channel, the aid coordination return band, and a new voice came through. Crisp, professional, a human voice with the particular cadence of compact aid coordination dispatch. HCMV deliberate margin. This is HCAT solid reasoning, compact aid tender first class, inbound to your position, ETA 9 hours. We are carrying 12 tons of emergency freight, full medical resupply, and 3 compact aid medical technicians. What is your current docking situation? I told them, single collar on Section 2 available, power on inner hub. Cold, they need thermal suits. HCAT solid reasoning said, copy that. We have thermal protocols standard. Captain, is the contact report accurate? Occupied status 214, 3+ years. I said yes. There was a brief silence on the solid reasoning's end. Then the dispatcher said, understood, Captain. Be advised you should expect additional units. The Earth Aid Coordination Desk has flagged this as a Category 2 occupied station response. I don't have the full dispatch list, but you should expect additional units. I said copy, thank you. I sat on my bridge in the amber corridor light and thought about what Category 2 meant. I had filed for minimum response. Category 2 was not minimum response. Category 2 was the designation that went on files when the Earth Aid Desk looked at a situation and decided that the minimum would not be sufficient. That what was required was not a single unit sent to stabilize, but a coordinated package sent to resolve. I went and woke Dov and told him we were going to need to clear the Section 2 docking collar for the incoming tender and find a secondary dock position for the deliberate margin. He looked at me for a moment, half awake, and said, "How many?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "That's either a good answer or a very good answer." I said, "I think it might be the second one. Go back to sleep for 3 hours. We'll need you sharp when they arrive." The HCAT Solid Reasoning docked at 12:11. They were good, professional, efficient, the kind of tender crew that has done this kind of docking in suboptimal conditions so many times it has become muscle memory. They came through thermal suited, they assessed the corridor, they began offloading without ceremony. 3 medical technicians came through within 15 minutes of pressurization, led by a senior tech named Rael Akafer, who introduced herself to Yuna with the directness of someone who wanted to know exactly what Yuna knew before she started anything. Yuna handed her the full assessment log. Rael read it in 7 minutes, confirmed it was organized the way she would have organized it, and said, "Good work. We'll take it from here. You should eat something." Yuna told me later she had not eaten since the previous morning. The Solid Reasoning's crew started offloading freight while the medical team worked. 12 tons of emergency supplies moving down a docking collar on a cold gas nebula station is not a fast process, but it is a process, and within 4 hours, the Section 3 loading dock held 14 tons total, and the Section 4 storage bay that had been sealed for power conservation 19 months ago had been opened and was receiving freight. Pedia boosted the inner hub heating with the Solid Reasoning's auxiliary power link. By 1700, the corridor temperature in sections 2 through 4 had climbed from 6 degrees to 11. 11 degrees is not warm. 11 degrees after 3 years of 6 is the difference between a conserved flicker and something more. I noticed the nodes first. Not on sale vaath, on the garrison members in the Section 3 corridor, the ones near the food station, the ones who were eating properly for what I suspected was the first time in months. The subdermal bioluminescence was coming back slowly, a faint blue warmth beginning at the jaw and spreading toward the collar line. Not the full blue-white of good health, but more than nothing. It was at 1847, while I was helping Dov run power routing for the expanded operations, that the second comm came through. HCMV deliberate margin. This is HCAT evident purpose. Compact aid tender first class, inbound to your position with HMBV calculated mercy. Be advised, I am trailing by approximately 4 hours. The calculated mercy is a Class 2 hospital barge and will require your largest available collar on approach. What is your largest collar diameter? I gave them the specifications. I confirmed we had a Section 1 collar available, the largest one, the freight collar, not designed for personnel transit but adaptable, as Pedia confirmed with some engineering adjustments he described at length, and I followed only partially. I confirmed the power situation. I confirmed that we were now running 2 active docking connections, and that a third would require creative allocation, and that our engineer had opinions about creative allocation, but that they were technically achievable opinions. Then I asked, what else is coming? There was a pause. Then the evident purpose dispatcher said, "Captain, the Earth Aid Coordination Desk has deployed a 6-unit escort wing to hold the sector perimeter while operations are in progress. The wing is approximately 18 hours out. You should also expect a second hospital capacity unit, HMBV Even Horizon, trailing the calculated mercy by roughly 12 hours. Total response package is being coordinated through the regional hub. Is there anything you need from us before arrival that you cannot source locally?" I said no, thank you. Then I put the comm on standby and sat very still for a moment. 3 tenders, 2 hospital barges, a 6-unit escort wing. We had filed for a tow cable and a food drop. The routing slip said single unit tow, low priority. I went to find Sale Vaath. She was in Section 3's common area, which had become, over the previous day and a half, a functioning operations center. The compact aid medical technicians had set up assessment stations. The Solid Reasoning's crew had reconfigured the food storage, and the garrison members who were not in medical assessment were moving with a kind of deliberate, contained energy that I recognized as what people look like when something has changed and they are still processing whether to believe it. Moving, but carefully. As if the situation might reverse itself if they moved too fast. Sale Vaath was at the duty roster board. She was updating it with the day's shifts, by hand, the way she had done every day for 3 years. I don't think she had stopped doing it because the Solid Reasoning had arrived. I think she had done it because she was the fleet adjutant, and this was what fleet adjutants did, and because the duty roster was how she kept track of who each person in her garrison was on any given day, and she was not going to stop keeping track just because help had come. I said, "Fleet adjutant, I need to tell you what's coming." She turned, the secondary eyelids fully open. I told her. I went through it methodically, the way I had been given the information, the evident purpose, the calculated mercy, the 6-unit escort wing, the even horizon, 3 tenders total, 2 hospital barges, a 6-unit wing to hold the corridor perimeter for the duration of the operation. She was quiet for the full duration of my account. The common area around us continued its work, medical assessments, freight sorting, the quiet, efficient movement of people who have a job to do, and Sale Vaath stood in the middle of it and was still. When I finished, she did not say anything for a moment. The subdermal nodes at her jaw and collar were doing something I hadn't seen before, not the faint conserved flicker of the first days, not the warmth spike I'd seen when I promised to stay, but a slow, steady pulse, an even rhythm, blue-white moving from jaw to collar and back again, like something that had been waiting to run at full capacity and had finally been given permission. I counted the seconds of her silence. I counted 11 of them before she spoke. She said, "We filed for a tow cable." I said, "I know." She said, "We did not file for." She paused. She said it again, more carefully. "We did not know to file for." I said, "I know, they sent it anyway." She said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know that I can explain it completely. I can tell you that when I put Occupied Station Emergency on the contact report, the Earth Aid Coordination Desk treated it as an Occupied Station Emergency. 214 people in a cold gas corridor with 14 days of food and 3 years of degraded survival is not a freight problem. It's a rescue. They sent what a rescue takes." She said, "The compact." I said, "The compact queue is 17 months long. The Earth Aid Override Channel is something different. I should have explained that more clearly when I filed yesterday. I wasn't certain it would work the way I thought. Now I'm certain." She said nothing for a moment. The pulse in her nodes was still running, slow and steady, and the nodes along her collar had come up brighter than any I had seen since docking, blue-white, warm, unheld. Then she said, "The even horizon, the 2nd hospital barge, do you know its capacity?" I said, "Class 2, I'd estimate 200 beds." She said, "We have 114 members of garrison who have not had a full medical assessment since the outer ring power failure, 3 years and 2 months ago. The 47 I flagged are the confirmed cases. The rest, they managed. They managed well, but they have not been assessed." I said, "They'll get one." She said, "Some of them." She stopped. She said, "I have 3 members of garrison who did not survive the first winter. They are in sealed storage in Section 6. I would want them properly received." I said, "They will be. I'll make sure that's in the next status report." She turned back to the duty roster board. I thought for a moment she was going to resume the update. Instead, she put her hand flat on the physical surface of the board, the way you put a hand on something when you are not sure you're done needing it, and she stayed like that for a moment, not looking at anything in particular. Then she said, I updated this board every day. I said, I know. She said, I didn't know if anyone was coming. I said, someone came. She did not answer. After a moment, her hand came down from the board, and she turned to the work of the common area, and I left her to it. The evident purpose docked at 2211. 6 more crew, 22 more tons of supplies, 2 additional medical technicians with specialized respiratory equipment who took one look at Rail Akafer's prioritization list and immediately began coordinating on the cases UNA had flagged as most acute. The Section 1 freight collar handled the connection adequately, which Pedia told me with the satisfaction of a man whose power routing had been fully vindicated. He also told me, in the same breath, that he was adjusting the power allocation matrix for the 3rd time in 2 days, and that he would appreciate it if no further major vessels docked before he slept for 8 hours. I told him the hospital barge was coming. He said, when? I said 4 hours. He said something in Ukrainian that I did not ask him to translate. The calculated Mercy arrived at 2:14. I was awake for it. I don't know exactly why. It wasn't my watch. Dov was on the bridge, but I was awake. And I went to the Section 1 observation port because the calculated Mercy is a Class 2 hospital barge, and Class 2 hospital barges are large enough that their approach is visible to the naked eye through a station viewport even in a cold gas nebula. They have running lights. Not the amber-orange emergency strips of a derelict station. Proper running lights, white and blue. The lights that operational vessels carry when they are where they are supposed to be, doing what they are supposed to do. The lights that say we are here and we are staying until this is finished. I watched it come in through the observation port. I was not alone. Several of the garrison had gathered there, not a crowd. They didn't do things as a crowd. They were too organized for that, but a quiet group of 6 or 7 in their layered station wear, secondary eyelids fully drawn back, nodes pulsing that slow blue-white rhythm I had started to recognize as the vaath-senn equivalent of held breath, of waiting to see if the thing you are seeing is real. The calculated Mercy was larger than Kothvel's Section 1 freight collar could dock directly. It took up position 30 meters off the station's primary hull, and a docking bridge extended from its secondary access port. The bridge locked onto the Section 1 collar at 2:47, running lights still on, white and blue. One of the garrison members standing at the port, a young officer, very young, ash-pale and thin in a way that spoke of the long ration months, said something in vaath-senn. My translation unit caught it and rendered it as approximately, "It is bigger than I thought." I did not say anything. Behind me, I heard another voice, older, quieter, a different register, say something else. The translation unit gave me, "There are 2 more coming." I still didn't say anything. I watched the calculated Mercy's docking bridge extend its final lock, and I listened to the garrison at the observation port, and I did not have words that were worth saying. The calculated Mercy's medical crew came through the bridge in organized waves, because that's what hospital barge crews do. They come in waves, each wave with a specific function. The first wave was assessment. The second wave was equipment. The third wave was patient transfer coordination. Within 40 minutes of docking, the Section 3 common area had become a formal medical intake station, and the duty roster board that Sail Vaath had maintained for 3 years and 2 months had been carefully, with her permission, moved to the Section 2 corridor wall to make room for the intake equipment tables. Dr. Othvel Sorath was in the intake station from the first minute, standing next to the calculated Mercy's chief medical officer, a compact, gray-haired human woman named Dr. Priya Bansal, who read Othvel Sorath's 12-page handwritten case log with the same careful attention Una had given it and said, in the flat, satisfied tone of a professional recognizing the work of another professional, "This is excellent documentation. Thank you. Let's start with the respiratory cases." Othvel Sorath's nodes, I noticed, went bright. Full capacity blue-white, maintained, not the conserved flicker that had been the default since we arrived. She had been managing 211 people's medical conditions for 38 months, with a depleted kit and no resupply. She had kept 12 pages of handwritten records because she knew that if anyone ever came, she wanted them to lose no time. And the first thing the incoming chief medical officer said was, "This is excellent documentation." I don't know what that meant to her. I'm a freight captain, and I don't read the full range of vaath-senn expression. But the nodes went bright and stayed bright, and I watched her and Dr. Bansal move immediately to the first patient together. Vaath-senn providing the history and context she had kept in her head, and on those 12 pages, Bansal running the equipment Vaath-senn hadn't had for 38 months, and whatever had been held in that careful documentation for 3 years began, in that moment, to do what it had been kept for. The escort wing arrived at 900 the following morning. 6 units, none of which were visible from Kothvel's viewports except as running lights in the nebula's diffuse amber. They were holding perimeter, as dispatched, not crowding the station or the operation. Their communications officer hailed the Deliberate Margins Bridge and introduced themselves in the brisk, unexcited way of military units who consider the current task standard work and want to be helpful rather than impressive. I told them the docking status. I told them the medical situation. I told them about the 3 members of the garrison who had died in the first winter and were in Section 6 sealed storage. The communications officer said, "We have a protocol officer aboard the Meridian Assurance. That's the wing lead. She'll coordinate with the fleet adjutant on mortuary receipt. Standard compact aid protocol with vaath-senn ceremonial overlay if the fleet adjutant can provide the requirements." I relayed this to Vaath. She said after a moment, "I have the requirements. I have had them prepared for 2 years." She had them prepared for 2 years. The ceremonial requirements for the proper receipt of her dead, written out and ready, in case a ship came that could act on them. I noted this in my personal log, and not in the completion report. The Even Horizon arrived on day 3. By the time it docked, the patient transfer from the station to the calculated Mercy was 40% complete. The respiratory cases first, then the connective tissue and injury cases, then the nutritional assessment cases, then the general garrison population in order of medical priority. It was organized, because everything the calculated Mercy's team did was organized, and because Dr. Vaath-senn's 3 years of careful documentation meant that nobody spent time on triage guessing. The 12-page log had been expanded by the incoming team into a full patient database, with Vaath-senn working alongside Dr. Bansal's team as the person who knew each case by name. The Even Horizon took the overflow, 91 patients by the time it was at full dock. The 2 barges worked in coordination, their medical teams cross-referencing on a shared channel that I could hear faintly from my bridge, the steady professional murmur of people doing necessary work, case by case, name by name. On the morning of day 4, I found Una in the Section 2 corridor. She was standing outside the room that had been the garrison's medical station, a small room with a folding table, a half-depleted kit, and the handwritten case log that Dr. Vaath-senn had lent her for the first 24 hours. The kit was gone now, replaced by a calculated Mercy supply locker. The case log was back in Dr. Vaath-senn's hands. Una said, "I've been trying to figure out how they did it." I said, "Which part?" She said, "All of it, the resource management. The way they structured the ration rotation. The way the medical monitoring worked without equipment. I mean, Vaath-senn was tracking oxygen saturation manually. She developed her own assessment indicators based on behavioral and visual markers because she didn't have the instruments. They're documented. They work. I checked them against the scans and they work. She was doing clinical medicine with observation and handwritten records and they work." I said she had a lot of practice. Una said, 3 years of practice, And if you read the roster, not the medical log, the duty roster, it's not just assignments. It's a record of who was where every day, who covered which shift when someone went down sick, who fixed the atmosphere recycler in Section 4 when the backup relay degraded, who noticed the food store accounting error in month 14 and corrected it before it became a crisis. It's a record of a garrison that kept functioning because someone tracked every single day and every single person and held it all together. I said, Sail Vaath. Una said, Sail Vaath. Yes, and Othvel Sareth, and the 40 or 50 other people on that board who kept doing their assignments because the board said it was their assignment and the board was current. They kept doing it even when there was no ship coming. They kept the record because the record was the way they stayed a garrison and not just people in a cold corridor waiting to die. I said nothing. She said, I keep thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't taken the routing slip. I said, someone else would have come eventually. She said, when? I didn't answer that. The last vaath-senn survivor transferred to the calculated Mercy at 1614 on day 4. Her name, as best my translation unit could render it, was vaath-senn. She was a junior signals technician, 23 years standard, which was young even for the garrison's youngest cohort. She had been flagged as one of the medical cases for 2 reasons. Her respiratory function was borderline from the recycled atmosphere exposure, and she had been rationing her emergency suit's air recycler to 8 hours per day to extend its operational life, which over 16 months had caused her resting oxygen saturation to run at a chronic deficit that Dr. Othvel Sareth had documented carefully and flagged as a condition requiring sustained monitoring once proper care was available. 8 hours of air recycler per day for 16 months. She didn't go to the calculated Mercy under protest or with any visible emotion that I could read from her face. She went carefully in her layered station wear with the secondary eyelids drawn fully back, and she paused at the Section 2 docking collar, the one I had locked onto Othvel 4 days ago, and looked back down the corridor. Sail Vaath was at the other end. She was the last garrison member who hadn't yet transferred. She would go last because she was the fleet adjutant and fleet adjutants go last, and she had been going last on every shift rotation and every resource allocation and every difficult call for 3 years and 2 months and 14 days. Vaath-senn looked at Sail Vaath. Sail Vaath's nodes were running full capacity blue-white, steady, unheld, warm. Vaath-senn's nodes were the same. They didn't say anything across that corridor. Whatever passed between them didn't need words, or didn't need words I had access to. Then Vaath-senn turned and went through the collar. Sail Vaath transferred at 1741. She was the last. She stopped at the collar entrance and turned to face me. She said, I have a question. I said, go ahead. She said, the routing slip that brought you here, was it a standard cargo form? I said, standard compact aid freight routing, yes. She said, we filed a service request, not a humanitarian request. We did not qualify the request under humanitarian channels. We filed a service request because we did not want to be categorized as an unable to sustain station. We thought the service request designation would process more efficiently than a humanitarian flag. I said, it processed in 17 months. She said, yes. The first service request took 17 months to assign. The second took 6 weeks to reach you. You filed a humanitarian override within 12 hours of arrival. I said, yes. She said, we did not know that the override channel existed. I said, no reason you would. It's not in the standard compact aid guide for station operators. It's in the contractor supplement, which I have because I'm a contractor. She said, if we had known, if someone had told us in the first month, in the first winter, that there was a channel that did not require imminent certification to activate. I said, I know. She said, I am not saying this as a criticism. I want to be clear. I am not. I said, I know you're not. And for what it's worth, the channel exists because situations exactly like yours existed before yours. Someone was in a cold corridor a long way from the queue and someone filed an override and it worked, and the channel became protocol. That's how these things develop. Someone had to be in the situation first. She said, someone like us. I said, someone like you. Yes, I'm sorry you were that someone. She said nothing for a moment. The secondary eyelids closed slowly and opened again. I had come to understand this as a deliberate expression, something chosen, not a reflex. She said, thank you, Captain Vale, for the routing slip for staying. I said, safe transit, Fleet Adjutant. She went through the collar. I stood in the Section 2 corridor for a moment, the empty corridor, the amber emergency strips, the cold that was slightly less cold now than when we had arrived, the silence that was a different kind of silence than the one I had heard when we first docked. Not the weight of 214 people conserving everything they had. Just the ordinary quiet of a station with nobody left in it, all of them transferred, all of them accounted for, the duty roster closed. I went back to my bridge. We undocked at 1900. Pettia cleared the tow rig attachment, the one that had been the original purpose of the routing slip, the single tow cable we had been sent to provide. He told me, with some professional irritation, that we never actually used it, which was technically true. We had not towed the station anywhere. We had docked and filed a report and fed people, and made room for 3 tenders and 2 hospital barges and a 6-unit escort wing. I told him to log the tow rig as pre-attachment status, viable, ready, not required. He gave me a look that said he was adding this to the list of freight trip anomalies we did not have a standard form for. The deliberate margin cleared Kothvel's section at 2014. The calculated mercy and the even horizon were still at dock. The escort wing was still on perimeter. The corridor, which had been amber and diffuse and quiet when we arrived, was now populated. Running lights from 6 vessels visible in the nebula's glow, white and blue, and the soft amber of the station's own emergency strips still running in the sections the medical teams hadn't finished transitioning. Dav came to the bridge. He looked at the display for a moment, the lights in the corridor, the docked barges, the escort perimeter. He said, how do you write this one up? I said, standard completion report. Single unit tow and resupply assignment, vein corridor, routing number vein 7749. Docking achieved. Station occupied, personnel successfully identified and transferred to appropriate compact aid medical facilities. Tow rig assessed as viable. Assignment closed. He said, that's 47 words. I said, about that. He said, Captain, there were 214 people in there for 3 years. I said, yes. He said, 2 hospital barges. I said, and a 6-unit escort wing. He said, and we filed a cargo form. I said, we filed a cargo form, then we filed an override, then we stayed until everyone was out. He said, that's not in the 47 words. I said, the 47 words cover what a completion report covers. The rest is in the contact log, the override filing, the medical intake records, and the duty roster photographs I took before the medical teams repurposed the common area. Anyone who reads the completion report and wants to know what actually happened has a great deal of documentation available to them. He said, you're going to make me sign that report. I said, you're my first mate. He said, I want it on record that I consider it the most dishonest document I've ever been asked to sign. I said, put it in the crew log. That's what the crew log is for. He stood there for a moment, looking at the corridor lights on the display. He said, the signals tech, the one who went last. I said, Vainsorath Ale. He said, her suit recycler, 8 hours a day. I said, for 16 months. He said she was monitoring the comms the whole time, from her signal station. I said I assumed so, that was her assignment. He said she was listening for us. I said nothing. He said for 3 years, with 8 hours of air. She was at a signal station in a cold corridor with 8 hours of recycler per day, listening for a ship to come through. I said yes. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, 47 words. I said, sign the report, Dov. He signed it. I filed it at 2209, standard compact aid freight contractor completion format, 47 words, routing number vein 7749, assignment closed. Then I poured what was left of the coffee, and I sat on my bridge in the dark of the vein corridor, with the running lights of 6 vessels still visible on my display. And I thought about a young signals technician in a cold corridor with 8 hours of air and a comm station and 3 years of listening. I thought about a fleet adjutant who updated a duty roster every day for 3 years because that was what fleet adjutants did, and who had the mortuary requirements for her dead written out and ready in case someone came who could act on them. I thought about a physician who kept a 12-page case log by hand, every patient, every treatment, every observation, organized by severity, so that whoever eventually arrived would lose no time. I thought about the word whatever you are able to provide, and what it costs a person to learn to say whatever instead of everything we need, and what it meant that the answer to whatever turned out to be 3 tenders, 2 hospital barges, and a 6-unit escort wing. Then I finished my coffee and set the deliberate margin on the transit course out of the corridor. Standard run, freight log closed, crew in rotation. The corridor behind us was full of lights.